The medical charity MSF has called for the controversial Israel-US-backed relief effort to be halted, branding it slaughter masquerading as humanitarian aid. There have been hundreds of deaths close to the sites run by Gaza Humanitarian Foundation since they opened a month ago. The head of GHF has denied that the shootings are linked to its aid distribution centres. Well, all of that comes as the US revealed it will give $30 million of funding to that organisation. It's the first confirmation of direct US funding for the group, which has been operating in the Gaza Strip since the end of May, following an 11-week aid blockade by Israel. So let's go to my colleague Mark Clowen. He's there on the Israel-Gaza border for us. Mark.
Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Let me just explain where we are. We're at the Kerem Shalom border crossing here. Over there in the distance, you can see Egypt. This, of course, this is the Israeli side of the border crossing. And then if we just pan across over there, you can see in the distance the grey border gate into Gaza. Now, that is where, before the 7th of October, 500 or 600 trucks of aid per day were getting into Gaza. But of course, since then, it has gone in peaks and troughs and really slowed to a trickle for a long time, and no aid at all for a 12-week blockade. And then, since then, far, far too little for the 2.1 million people on this ground in Gaza who are facing catastrophic levels of hunger. And I can tell you, Matthew, that here at Kerem Shalom today, there have been no trucks crossing. The Israeli government blockading it again for a couple of days to try to stop what they say is looting of aid by Hamas. Well, the UN has said that 400 Palestinians have been killed inside Gaza in recent weeks, many of them queuing for aid at the distribution sites, and many of them at sites set up by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That is that controversial US and Israeli foundation that started operating 1 month ago. Merlin Thomas from BBC Verify has been looking at dozens of videos of people who have been killed at the distribution sites, and all have been since the GHF started operating. Here's her report.
After a month of US and Israeli-backed operations in Gaza, there have been repeated reports of killings of Palestinians trying to access aid. We've been investigating footage from Gaza to see just how dangerous it's become for Palestinians. Now, on May the 26th, the privately run Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began its operations. This controversial new scheme, which bypasses the UN's operations, was introduced after Israel lifted its 11-week blockade on aid. There are 3 here in the south and 1 here in the north, near an Israeli security zone known as the Netzarim corridor. The distance between them sometimes forces Palestinians to make long journeys, and in a war zone, that comes with added danger. In statements over the past month, the IDF has repeatedly said it's fired warning shots at individuals who they described as suspects or said posed a threat. Now, in videos we verified, you can see hundreds of people, some holding what appeared to be empty flour sacks, scrambling over mounds of rubble and hiding in ditches. Several bursts of automatic gunfire can also be heard. The person who uploaded the video told us that people had been travelling to access aid at SDS-4 from the coastal roads west of the Netzarim corridor. We've also verified this video, posted the next day. We know it was filmed nearby, and you can see crowds panicking, and then you can see what appears to be an explosion. Video from the scene goes on to show a number of injured people, including children. The GHF announced secure routes for those who needed to access aid, and they are marked here in blue. Now, while analysing videos relating to people trying to access aid, we found that several videos were located near to the SDS-4 distribution site. Now, each corridor has a start point and a stop point. Palestinians are warned that crossing without being given the go-ahead is dangerous. The red dots marked here are the location of videos we verified that appear along the route. Now, some of those are where gunfire can be heard, others show injured Palestinians being carried. Now, the GHF has denied that there had been any incident or fatalities at or near any of its distribution sites. It's worth saying there are also other aid providers trying to distribute aid, but they say they're reliant on Israeli authorities to facilitate their missions. For example, we've also verified footage relating to other aid sites that aren't related to the GHF. like this video in the southern city of Khan Yunis. That was posted on the 17th of June, where we can see people running before you can hear a loud bang. Other extremely graphic footage from the scene showed at least 21 bodies, more injured people, and damaged vehicles. Witnesses told the BBC that IDF drones and a tank fired at the crowd as they were waiting to collect aid. The Israeli army told BBC Verify that it identified a gathering next to an aid distribution truck that got stuck in the area of Khan Yunis and near IDF troops operating in the area. They said they were aware of reports of injured individuals from IDF fire following the crowd's approach, and that the IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved individuals. There's been international criticism of this new plan and the impact it has on Palestinians trying to get aid. Sarah Elizabeth Dill, a legal expert, told us mass shootings during civilian relief access violate core rules against targeting civilians and using starvation against them, potentially rising to war crimes. The IDF told us that its forces conduct systematic learning processes aimed at improving the operational response in the area and minimizing possible friction between the population and the IDF forces. Meanwhile, the GHF told us that ultimately the solution is more aid, which will create more certainty and less urgency among the population.
As Merlin Thomas from BBC Verify. Well, according to the health ministry in Gaza, which is run by Hamas, 72 people have been killed in the last 24 hours, many of them at the distribution sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The chairman of that organization is an American evangelical pastor called Reverend Johnny Moore. He has been speaking to my colleague Tim Franks from the BBC NewsHour programme on the BBC World Service, who asked him, first of all, what the GHF is doing to prevent deaths at its distribution points in Gaza.
We're not actually sure that all of this information that's being distributed every single day is entirely accurate. We're quite certain that a huge percentage of it is part of a significant disinformation effort to try to both discourage Gazans from coming to get our assistance and also to sort of try to get us to fold up our operation. However, despite the amount of energy and time and effort that it takes every single time one of these pieces of news or disinformation or whatever it is comes out, we spend an extended period of time, trying to understand what actually happened, if anything actually happened, and whether there's a way that we can make it less likely to happen. In most circumstances, we haven't been able to, identify anything happening. Certainly, there are people dying every day in the Gaza Strip. It is an active war zone. We are not doing this work in the middle of a ceasefire. We're doing it in the middle of a hot war. Some of that is unintentional. I'm sure some of it is certainly intentional, at least on the Hamas side. And the IDF has said, overtly a few times that they were responsible for some casualties. However, I think people need to understand that it is disinformation that people going to GHF sites are being killed. We have no evidence of that happening in proximity to our sites.
Well, let's get the view from inside Gaza. We can speak to Jamil Sawalmeh. He is the country director at Action Aid Palestine, and he actually joins us from the other side of the Palestinian territories in Ramallah, but has teams on the ground inside Gaza. Jamil Sawalmeh, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You heard there the chairman of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation describe these reports of killings at their distribution points as disinformation. What is your response to that? What have your teams on the ground seen at these distribution points?
Thanks for having me. First of all, of course, we are hearing repeated reports from our local partners, including our teams who are operating on the ground in Gaza, about the number of deaths that are happening in the vicinity of these so-called aid distribution sites. Unfortunately, we're hearing also repeated patterns of people being killed either on the way or in the vicinity of these aid distribution sites. We have seen, according to the recent numbers, that more than 500 people were killed, either queuing or actually on the way to these aid distribution sites. But just to begin with, when we deal with the GHF now, we're dealing with a mechanism that is widely denounced by the vast majority of aid international organizations operating in Gaza, including the United Nations, and also all of the Palestinian entities, including the private sectors and the Council of the Palestinian Families, Tribes and Clans in Gaza. To begin with, it's from our point of view, it's an illegal mechanism that violates the basic humanitarian principles and lacks any sort of operational capacity or experience to be able to do household level distribution, which is needed in Gaza now. And unfortunately, this new mechanism undermines the decades of experience by United Nations agencies as well as international aid agencies, including Action Aid, who have been operating in Gaza for many, many years and have established aid distribution mechanism based on operational and on-the-ground logistical arrangements that actually allow them to distribute food and much-needed medical supplies to the affected civilian population. So whatever justification they are providing, unfortunately, it's another effort to justify an illegal mechanism that challenges the accepted world humanitarian system and architecture, which is something that we totally reject and do not accept.
Just to be clear, are you saying that the people who are being killed at the distribution sites, are they being killed by Israeli soldiers? Are they being killed by armed groups? Are they being killed by Hamas? What is the information you have?
Well, basically, based on the information that we are receiving from our local partners, including Al-Auda Health Organization, which is a civil society organization providing health services in Gaza, we have seen that at least the cases that were documented by our local partners that have been actually killed by Israeli fire, either by direct artillery bombardment or from gunfire in the vicinity of these sites. These are the reports that we have so far from the ground. And I also refer to the most recent article in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, also covering stories and testimonies from Israeli soldiers who operated in Gaza, saying that they have received direct orders from their commanders to shoot anybody in the vicinity of these aid distribution centers, including unarmed civilians and also civilians who do not pose any sort of harm to the Israeli military. So I think we have enough evidence to believe that these civilians were killed by the Israeli forces in the vicinity of these so-called aid distribution centers.
I should just say that the Israeli authorities say that they are investigating all the reports of the opening fire at the distribution points, and they maintain their position is that the United Nations is in cahoots with Hamas, which is why they have set up this aid foundation. But I take your point coming through there. Just finally, Jamil, just give us a sense of the needs on the ground and what your teams are telling you in terms of the lack of food aid and medical aid at the moment.
Yes, of course. So currently we are facing the most dire, the most complicated humanitarian situation since the beginning of this war in October 2023. Unfortunately, we're seeing a situation where people are being starved in an engineered famine due to the total closure of the Gaza Strip. While we know that thousands and thousands of metric tons of aid are actually piled up at the borders of Gaza, while Israel deliberately closed these border crossings and that do not allow that amount of humanitarian aid to be transported into Gaza and distributed by organizations, international aid agencies and the UN agencies who have established capacities. So this has deepened the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We are seeing that, as I said previously, more than 500 people were killed, either queuing or trying to get aid from these new aid distribution sites, in addition to thousands who have been also injured. We're seeing that there are no improvement, despite that if whatever the GHF are saying in their statements, we haven't seen any improvement on the ground in terms of the malnutrition situation. We're seeing that there are about 70,000 children are now suffering from acute malnutrition, while 10,000 children are visiting medical points on daily basis to receive medical support because of acute malnutrition. We have seen that 62 children, and these are documented cases that have actually died because of acute malnutrition. In addition, of course, to all the shocking figures about the number of civilians who have been killed and injured. So we do not see any improvement in the current humanitarian situation, while we have a total starvation and a thirst catastrophe now in Gaza due to the blockade.
Jamil Sawalmeh from Action Aid for Palestine, thanks very much indeed for joining us.